Hello gainers, I'm Ralphie and welcome to my channel called Fitter Philosophy. This is one of my funeral stories. I do these series now and again, basically because they're a very important part of my journal. Over the years I've kept a journal on and off relating to just taking notes and relating to other people's lives that I encountered briefly in my job back in the old days as an undertaker in Glasgow, which as a job in itself gets you quite close to anonymous people, because at a time of death a certain barrier falls and you tend to get more commentary from relatives, from friends. You hear things mentioned in the eulogy, which is the narrative of the person which accompanies a funeral service. And it's often the case that I would be looking after and attending to a funeral of someone who I knew nothing about, but by the end of the funeral service and chatting to the family, you knew an awful lot more about them, and people are full of surprises. This is a fact of it. I'm going to tell you about Donald Macdonald, a humble man, a quiet man. He was never one for a family. He had brothers and sisters, so they basically kept an eye on him, but he was very good at looking after himself. He had a simple flat in the East End of Glasgow, and he worked as a joiner. He was well thought of because he was the quiet one that got on with the job without any fuss. And if there was any difficult woodwork or challenging woodwork, he'd be the one that had the skills and the aptitude and the courage to go in and just do that unique job, and he did it very well. He was really good at working with wood. He'd established this for himself very early on in life, and as a result he carefully chose his career to reflect his lack of opportunities and his ambitions. And his ambitions were to be left alone, to enjoy his books and to enjoy his walks. Initially it was country walks, but latterly, once he got himself a car, he went mountain climbing. Now, not sheer mountain climbing with crampons and ice axes. He would go to the higher hills and the higher mountains in summer, but go for the lower areas, the coastal areas, walking in winter. He particularly enjoyed winter time because it was particularly quiet. He enjoyed the silence of the Scottish Highland landscape, and he looked after himself very, very well. He lived to 96. Something you need to know about Donald: he was a deep thinker. And in his deep thinking, his philosophical thinking, and it was his brothers and sisters who were aware of it and made sure it was celebrated during his funeral service. And I mean, they all lived to a good age, and there was quite an extended family, although they didn't really, the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, they never knew him, because he was so, I wouldn't say reclusive, but he kept himself to himself successfully and tactfully. He was very tactical about it. He enjoyed his hill walks. He had the right gear. He built his experience. He never took big risks. He drew sketches and then watercolours of the photographs he took, which were of a very high standard, although after the funeral they disappeared amongst the family as keepsakes and souvenirs. And he initially, although he wasn't well known in the walking community, he could be found most weekends in a bothy somewhere, which is essentially free accommodation for hill walkers. Very basic. Just a roof over your head and somewhere to put your sleeping bag down. And Donald he was the part. He walked the walk, no pun intended. He talked the talk when he was actually had something to say. And there was a younger generation of hill walkers who really warmed to him because he was open-minded and accepting and helpful. The real changer was when he was in his 80s, and for some reason a group of young people got stuck near a bothy. The word is that they'd gone into a peat bog and got bogged down, and they were struggling to get one of the members out when he happened to come along. And without saying too much, he walked down the road a bit, and they thought he was just walking away, but he came back shortly with a plank of wood. He laid it out, and he showed them. Not only did he rescue the young lady from the peat bog, but he showed the group in their entirety how to recognise a peat bog, how to cope if you go into a peat bog, how to avoid panicking, and how to swim your way out of it. We're now in the age of social media, so they mentioned it online. I don't think he was too happy about that, but he didn't want the publicity. But he found that complete strangers up in the hills, young people would acknowledge him and give him a wave and say, "Hi Donald, how you doing Donald? It's great to see you Donald." He became a character. There were times where, and as he kind of warmed, as he mellowed and softened in his old age, he would sit and chat with the young people in the bothies round the dying embers of the fireside, and he'd give them life advice and he'd answer their questions, and it was apparent that they felt that they got a lot of wisdom from him, and this gave him a cult status. When his funeral was arranged, and bear in mind he was well into his 90s, it was expected that the family would be there and that would be up, but that would be it. But they decided to put a paper notice into a local newspaper intimating his funeral at Daldowie Crematorium at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a specific day. And the family were visibly shocked at the number of complete anonymous strangers who turned up for Donald's funeral, all dressed in outdoors and climbing and hill walking gear. There was almost 100 of them. Fortunately, Daldowie's a large crematorium and everybody could get a seat. And this is when the family realised that Uncle Don, as they called him, had one life, lived separate from his family, but a completely different life up in the hills, away from the city, where he loved to be. The reception at the end of the funeral, naturally they couldn't cope. But the family, they couldn't cope with the sheer number of people. It was probably at a bowling club or a local hotel. But everybody was fine about it. And it was about 6 weeks later that some members of the family were invited to attend a hill memorial service for Donald. And I always remember they came into the funeral parlour because they were actually in tears and how touched they were at the community that Donald had built around him up in the hills, that they knew nothing about this. Particularly young people. People would stop him on the paths and on the in the most unusual of places and just say, Donald, I'm looking for some advice in this. And he always gave advice. He always gave his time. And it meant a lot to him. Hill walking was his reason to live, his motivation, and it became enhanced in a way he never expected and nobody saw coming. And this is real life. This happens. It's not that unusual. The memorial service was a night in a large bothy. A lot of people turned up with tents. They made sure it was summertime. They went out and they had a circle where they all held hands and sang Auld Lang Syne for Donald. They lit a fire for him. Everybody who came brought firewood. So it was a big fire. And the family were overwhelmed by the positivity of the experience. And there you have it. Thanks for watching.